Welcome to the Essential Tax Podcast with your host, Mishkin Santa. In each episode, we'll take the complex world of tax, all the jargon, acronyms, and stuff that make your eyes glaze over, and explain it in an impactful way to understand the complex and unknown areas. You can find this show on all the major platforms, including YouTube, LinkedIn, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and on our website, thewolfgroup.com. Now, here's the host of Essential Tax Podcast, Mishkin Santa.
Hi, everybody. Welcome to the podcast. It has been a little bit of time since we've done the podcast because we've been knee-deep in tax season for the 2024 tax return, which we'll do an entire podcast debriefing that situation. We've also got some updates on the new tax bill coming out. It sounds like it should be released very soon by the House and then the Senate, and then President Trump wants it signed, I believe, on July 4th. So we should have a new tax bill at that point in time, and then we'll do several podcasts that will kind of go through all of that. Today's podcast is a mini cast, though. That's what I'm going to call it. This podcast I'm dedicating to the Wolf Group support team. Those folks they're like my front line of defense. They get so many questions about certain forms that people need to fill out. They're typically called withholding tax forms. And they're very simple questions. We have some videos on our YouTube channel that walk you through them, generally speaking. But I thought today I would do just a mini cast where I would walk through the differences between the forms W-9 and W-8-BEN, and for individuals only. It should be noted that there are a slew of other withholding tax forms that could come into play. The W-8-BEN-E, for example, is used by business entities. Sometimes it's used by trusts. You've got the W-8-ECI. You've got the W-8-IMY. You've got the 8233. There's a W-4. So there's a lot of different withholding forms that are used by the federal government to withhold tax in various situations. But the focus of today's podcast is going to come down. I'm talking about two different forms. I'm talking about the W-9 and the W-8-BEN. When do you use them? How do you use them? What are they appropriate for? When would someone request those from you? So let's kick it off, and let's first talk about the easier one, which is the form W-9. So if I'm a U.S. tax resident, and when I say tax resident, I mean an individual satisfying the substantial presence test, a green card holder, or a U.S. citizen, I'm going to complete a form W-9 if I'm opening up a financial account. So if I'm opening up a bank account or a brokerage account, or maybe even if I'm starting a new job, I'm going to complete the form W-9. And the W-9, we're gonna add some links to the show notes on all of these so you can see them. But it's a really, really simple form. It's got basically 7 different questions. You name, if you're a business, give them your business, and then kind of what's your status? Are you an individual or are you a type of business entity? Address, who's requesting the information, and then any account numbers that are linked to the W-9 that you're filling out. Then you put your taxpayer identification number. And a lot of people always get this messed up because they say, I don't have a taxpayer identification number. And then my question to them is, well, do you have a social security number? The answer is yes. And believe it or not, they are one and the same. Your taxpayer identification number and your social security number are they're the equivalent. If you're not eligible for a social security number, then you either have or you should get an individual taxpayer identification number or an I-10. You can apply for an I-10 using the form W-7. Those are really tied into your immigration status. So if you have questions about that, that's kind of the route that you would take. You would maybe work with your immigration attorney to determine which way to go on that particular question. But the W-9, you fill that out. It's got 2 different parts to it, part 1, part 2. You sign it under penalty of perjury. You give it to the institution. For U.S. tax residents, there generally is no withholding tax that's being applied because it's on you. You're a tax resident. You either need to make estimated tax payments, or if you're an employee, you're setting up your withholding through your W-4. But for a bank account, they're not going to withhold, tax on interest income unless you tell them to. For the brokerage account, the same thing. They're not going to withhold tax on your dividends and your interest and your capital gains unless you tell them to. Now, let's shift gears for a second here and let's talk about the form W-8BEN. This generally will occur if you are a non-resident alien, meaning that you're not a U.S. tax resident, you're not a green card holder, you're not a U.S. citizen. There are some visas that you can obtain. Presence inside the United States do not count, and you'd be considered a non-resident. So you're physically inside the U.S., but you're a non-resident. Those can generally occur under the A visa, the G visa, the F visa, the J, and the M visa. But they all have their various nuances. It's not like a blanket coverage forever, ever, perpetuity. So make sure you work with a qualified tax professional to determine if you are a non-resident, if you're under one of those visas, or if you are a true non-resident and maybe you want to invest inside the United States. The W-8BEN is generally what you're going to complete. And similar to, the W-9, it's got a series of questions. It's going to want to know your name, your country of citizenship, your mailing address. If you've ever had a U.S. taxpayer identification number, some of those visas that I just talked about, they actually do give you a social security number, or you can be eligible to get an I-10. You need to put that on there. If you have a foreign taxpayer identification number, so you're a resident of country X is giving you a taxpayer identification number, you need to put that in there, and then you need to put your date of birth. And when you do that, that completes the majority of the form. There is a second part to the form where you can tell the U.S. financial institution, or any financial institution for that matter, to reduce the withholding tax. Withholding tax is generally going to be 30%, and it's going to be only on certain sources of income. But you can reduce that withholding tax if there's a provision of a tax treaty that does apply to you. Now, the reading of U.S. tax treaties is not for the faint of heart. It's not an easy thing to do. You definitely need to get some advice and make sure you understand what positions you're taking before you take them. But if you do qualify for a tax treaty position, you do need to complete part 2, and you would then give that to the financial institution. Now, I didn't limit my comments to U.S. financial institutions because in some cases, if you're opening up a bank account abroad or a brokerage account abroad, under FATCA, the Foreign Account Tax Compliance Act, they may want you to complete one of these 2 forms. And you may not even know you're completing the form because they've taken the form and they've put it in their own format, because they're trying to ascertain whether you're a resident or a non-resident. Which leads me to one big comment that I have about both the W-9 and the W-8BEN forms. Neither of these go to the Internal Revenue Service. They go to the financial institution that you give them to, or the employer that you give them to, and that institution or that employer, whoever you give them to, they hold on to it. That's their job, is to hold on to it. And the form does expire. It's not like you give it to them once and then you can have a bank account for 30 years and they'll never ask you to update the form. Generally, they're going to come ask you for the updated form at least after 3 years, sometimes after 5 years. But you're going to have to update the form on a regular basis so that they know that you're still the status that you originally signed up for the account under. If your status does change, for example, if you are a non-resident and then you obtain a green card, then you do need to give your financial institution or your broker an updated form. So you would then go from the W-8BEN to the W-9. Or if you've expatriated from the United States, let's say you are a long-term lawful green card holder and you've expatriated, then you would go from giving a W-9 to a W-8BEN. So there are different ways that you can kind of switch between the forms depending on if your status changes. I will note that, again, these look very simple. They look like they're very easy to fill out, but they're not DIY forms. You should try to get the best advice possible because even though the form doesn't go to the IRS, it's what that financial institution will use to set up your account and to do your withholding. And a lot of times people don't understand when they've done it wrong until a year later, and then they get their documents from the financial institution. Maybe they're a non-resident and they get a 1099 when they should have got a 1042S, or they're a resident and they get a 1042S and they should have gotten a 1099. And a lot of times you don't even know you've done it wrong until, a lot longer period later on. And then you have to go back and fix it. And a lot of times you can't fix what's already been done. You can only fix prospectively going forward. So again, take great care with these forms. Make sure you get them filled out properly. I'll put links to the show notes on all of these different forms so you can look them up and have easy access to the most recent versions of these forms that are online. Thank you.
You've been tuning in to the Essential Tax Podcast with your host, Mishkin Santa. You can find this show on all the major platforms, including YouTube, LinkedIn, Apple Podcast, Spotify, and on our website, thewolfgroup.com. Thank you for your positive reviews, comments, questions, and for sharing this show with others.